This video is brought to you by edTech Recharge with sponsorship from Project FoundEd. Project FoundEd is a community of edtech founders that aim to make the edtech industry easier to navigate through data. They provide their community with resources so that the most impactful edtech solutions can rise to the top. To learn more about Project FoundEd or to be part of the community, visit their website, projectfounded.org. Enjoy the video.
Everyone, I'm Dr. Kripa Sundar, the founder and lead consultant at edTech Recharge. edTech Recharge is a small but powerful research contracting firm that works with edtech entrepreneurs, whatever the stage of their company, with one key objective, and that is to bring the science of learning and motivation into their product and into the hands of our kids who deserve effective and engaging learning. What comes to mind when we say research? What is research? Lots of questions, not enough answers. So here's a quick 15 to 20 minute session for you. Here are some of the questions that we've heard. Hey, can you design our efficacy research? Or, I'm still in the product development stage. I don't think I need research now. Maybe I'll reach out to you when I'm bigger. Or on the other hand, I've already scaled to 50,000 active users. We are ramping up super quick. I don't have time or the need for research now. And like most other researchers on the planet, our answer almost always is, well, it depends. 5 questions we're going to be answering in the next 15-20 minutes. Jot down your responses as we think about each of those. The 5 questions we'll be answering are, what is research? How can research help me? What type of research do I need? How do I get started with research? Why hire a trained researcher? These are the questions that I've been dying to respond to, and here's my chance. Start with the first question. What is research? Go on. Take a piece of paper and write down what pops to mind when you say research. I'll wait for you. Now let's think a little bit. Typically, when I say the word research, myself included, before I got into the field of research, we often think about research being specifically for STEM fields or something that's so labor intensive or time intensive or just expensive. We also tend to think about research as something that's for honorary sake, just for knowledge sake, that we're learning just because we want to learn. While as much as I love that kind of research, research is not just for science. It's not just for development, and it's definitely not for just honorary sake. In fact, research is the systematic collection of data with an intentional analysis guided by a research question. You can conduct research in a month to a couple of years. So research can range in its scope, in its timelines, and its budget. Now that you think about research in perhaps slightly different terms, the next question for us to answer is, how can research help you? How can research help me? I often like to share that research is a frame of thinking. It's not a recipe that has strict procedures, has a strict format that you can apply every single time and get the best results. It's fairly contextual dependent, and yes, we have general guidelines that we can follow. But primarily, research is a way of thinking where we can identify the right problems and find the solutions for them. No matter what kind of research you're doing, or even if you're interested or not interested in research, there's one key thing to make the most out of your research efforts. And that is, what is your goal? Why do you want to do the research? That is going to determine everything else behind it. It's going to determine what design we use for our research, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, but also whether research is the right time or fit for you and your organization for that particular goal at that time. Couple of ways that we've helped edtech companies think about research has been, what are my customers thinking of my product now? Or even, hey, I've got a ton of data, but we need to set up procedures in place where it's ongoing data analysis for meaningful insights. In other cases, it's as simple as, I want to decrease the time to scale. Upscaling is always exciting, whether it's our own firm or someone we're working with. But before we go too far down that lane, let's pull ourselves back down. We've talked about that research can be of different scopes, can be of different rates, different timelines, all dictated by our main goal. Now I want you to take a minute or so and break down that big goal you wrote down into key questions. Now these questions might be questions about your product, about your market. It could even be an assumption that you're making. Take a second and pull yourself back to write down, based on the goal that you've identified, what are 2 questions that you come up with that you want to test, that you want to ascertain if you're right? Throughout this segment, we will be referring back to your questions to think through which type of research might be best suited for the project and questions you have in mind. So as you're listening, think about whether the research I'm talking about is the one that suits your project. Before we go into more detail, here's what we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about 3 classifications of research and go into a little more detail about each of these subcategories so you can start thinking through what are the types of research and what it is that you're actually looking for. By goal. Now here, I'm not asking the question of how do I use my research, but I'm asking the question, do I want to use my research? Sounds a little absurd, doesn't it? Especially coming from someone working in the industry. But it's an interesting and important question to think about, even if you are in the industry, even if you are an organization. Classify research based on the purpose. When I say purpose, in my mind, I'm asking the question, how do I plan to use the research that I'm creating, that I'm funding, that I'm investing in? How am I going to use the results? Now, this kind of research can be either formative or summative. Third way of classifying research might be something that a lot of you are familiar with. This classification is based on the methodology we use to conduct our research investigations, commonly broken down into quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method. I wanted to give you folks a slide where you can sit back and reflect. Take a snapshot of this slide and reflect on the difference between applied research and knowledge creation, so you can really identify what the value of research is, what kind of research you need, but also how research can help you. More often than not, when edtech companies come to us, they talk about applied research. Some examples of applied research could be usability studies, could be market research, building logic models, or even conducting usability and feasibility pilots. There are some companies who also reach out to us with the idea of knowledge generation and think about, can my data provide more insight into students' task on behavior? Or can my product give us more insight into what is the ideal progression for mathematic concepts for 3rd graders? Now, these are great questions to ask, and both are equally valid. Which one applies to you depends on the question that you've asked. Now, look back at the questions that you wrote. Do they fit into one of these 2 categories? Can you classify them as formative research, where it's less resource intensive, more ongoing in nature, and you want to use that data to make your product better? You want it to be an ongoing episode. Or are you looking for research that's more along the lines of efficacy research, where you're asking the big question, how do I know my product is effective? Or for whom is my product effective and in what context? A summative research project gives you a snapshot. Of research is something that you're likely already familiar with. This classification is based on the methodology we're using, commonly broken down into quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method. Which method is most appropriate? Depends on your research question. Now I hope you're starting to see the trend of the number of times I say depends. Let's say, for example, the goal of your company project at this time is to identify your customer satisfaction. Very commonly, we might send out a big survey to everyone, say, hey, respond to these 3 questions, we'll calculate a net promoter score, and we use that as a proxy as customer satisfaction. If the goal of that project is just to know, is just to report, just to post on our website, that's good enough. But if you are taking the more strategic approach and trying to understand why are they scoring you that much, we were to conduct a mixed method study where we do send out a survey and we ask them at the end of it, would you be willing to chat with us? Even if a majority say no, you might still get about 5% of folks who come back and say yes. And understanding their responses, understanding their larger customer experience provides an opportunity for us to understand why that scale happened. Or even identify potential concerns that seem like something you want to fix before you scale much larger. So thinking through what your research question is, but also keeping in mind what the goal of your project is, can influence which method we apply. Hold in there, folks. We're down to the last 2 questions. And I'm hoping the question you're asking now is not necessarily what is research or what kind of research do I need, but starting to think ahead to be, how do you get started with research? My goal, my ultimate dream would be where every edtech person has their in-house team that's capable of conducting robust research and informing their product. That's also part of the reason why at edTech Recharge, we not only conduct research, but are more than happy to provide consulting and professional development for your research teams to develop their own capacities. So how do you get started on research? It could take you 6 months to learn, it could take you a whole year. But here are the 5 key steps towards conducting your research. In fact, you've already started. The first one is to establish a super clear goal. Why are you conducting this research project? Is it to apply the findings? Is it to create knowledge? Are you going to apply the findings just this once, or are you thinking of creating a process that makes sure that the process works every time? The next step is breaking down into research questions. Now, these are 2 steps you've done in the last 15-20 minutes or so. But the remaining 3 steps are those that's going to perhaps take a lot longer. Your third step, once you've identified your research questions, is to ascertain your timeline. Especially when you're working with applied research, you may have a firm timeline on when you need it done. In addition to ascertaining your timeline, you also want to identify what's the budget you've marked for this. Your budget is also going to be associated with what the goal of the study is, if it's formative versus if it's summative. It's also related to your budget, and your timeline is also what are the available resources. Don't overlook people who've designed the product. Don't overlook people who manage the product. Sometimes research needs only a little bit of scaffolding and you can carry it on. Other times, it's helpful to have someone who's trained to work through with you. So look at your resources. Identify your time, your budget, and your human power. Once we have all of our logistics done, then comes the fun part. Very simply, choose the design that works for you, typically between the 3 methodologies that we talked about, and then start executing it. When I say execute your method, you're basically working through your IRB, which is basically Institutional Review Board, which we have to apply for permission if we're planning to publicly share and disseminate the data that we collect. And let's say if it's for internal purposes, you don't need that IRB exemption or approval. Once you have that, you start designing all of your, you'll start your data collection, then your analysis, and the final step comes into analysis and communicating. The analysis and communication is also tied back to our goals. Depending on whether we're looking for efficacy research or we're looking at something more formative, what analysis we run and more importantly, how we communicate the findings of that research is going to change. You can work through all of that yourself, and I do recommend you to do it if you have a research team in place who've done this before or who can work through it with a little bit of guidance, and we'd be absolutely happy to help you with that. Or if you're a small startup or you are a large company but don't really have a research team in place, feel welcome to reach out. We're happy to help you whenever we can. Choosing between conducting your research in-house or hiring a trained researcher could be a difficult decision. In some cases, if you are planning for a formative research project to last years, you might be considering hiring a full-time researcher as part of your team to conduct that research. In other cases, you might be looking at a short-term project where a hired researcher might fit the bill. Either scenario, whether you're contracting your research project or hiring someone in, consider hiring someone trained in your project area. So if you are a company that works in edTech, hire someone who's familiar with learning pedagogies. Hire someone, let's say, go even specific in math instruction or literacy or the science of motivation. The reason for hiring someone who's trained in the research methods, particular to the field that you are working in, are three key benefits. One, a trained researcher is more likely going to know what questions to ask. Helping you refine your research questions is perhaps the biggest service a researcher can do, because that determines everything after that. Second, a trained researcher is more likely going to be able to proactively plan to collect the kind of data that you need, but also identify opportunities for additional data collection. For example, when we conduct usability studies, we not only collect information on what our set goals are, but if the opportunity arises, we use that interview as an opportunity to reach back out to them and propose solutions and say, what if we did this? Or what are your thoughts about a dashboard that presents this other piece of information? Identifying those opportunities can save you a lot more in the long run. And the third key piece, I think, is a trained researcher is going to be able to give you more grounded recommendations. And when I say grounded recommendations, I don't merely mean, hey, here's everything that you can fix, or here's everything that's working well, but being able to weight which of these are most critical for your product growth, which of these are most critical for learning, and how do you balance that trade-off? Because there's almost always going to be a tension between what's effective and what's feasible, and how do you meet them in the middle? Whatever you decide, the key goal is for you to ask better questions and get started with your research. Start small. A foot forward is always a foot ahead. And always feel welcome to reach out to us. I'm Dr. Kripa Sundar from edTech Recharge, and I'd love to hear from you, whether you have thoughts, comments, or even additional questions. Follow us on LinkedIn. Connect with us in person. We'd be more than happy to help you with your research needs. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.